right there. There we go. Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for streaming us into your living room or car or vacation rental or wherever you are. And thanks to the folks who stuck around to listen to Dr. David McEwan as he tells us his stories. We talked a little bit today about who tells your stories. And David, you get to tell your own today, which is pretty wonderful. I am going to turn things over to your sister Sheila, who will introduce you. There will be a time for questions afterwards. We don't anticipate this will be more than 45 minutes or in that range. But if you're ruminating on some questions and you're at a distance, you can put those questions on Facebook or text me and I will try to relay them. All right, so I'm going to turn things over to Sheila Breeding.
Thank you, Linda. My name is Sheila Breeding, and I'm an elder at Christ Presbyterian Church, and I've been worshiping here with the Bound Brook congregation for about 9 months. And it is with my sisterly pride that I get to introduce my brother David today, who is visiting from his home state of Hawaii. And he was visiting during a period of time where a long-awaited book was being published about the 25-year history of same-gender marriage. And I said to him very casually, well, David, why don't you come to speak to folks at my church? They're very active, and they would love to hear from you. He took me very, very seriously and has worked quite a bit during our vacation in preparing some unknown and unheard of details about what happened during these two movements of the AIDS crisis and same-gender marriage. As he's going to give more to us than I really asked, twining together these two movements. And as I have maneuvered these culture wars of homophobia, it has always been with the knowledge that my brother and later my brother-in-law were repeatedly thrown by the American public into a crucible inflamed with hatred. I marveled at my brother's resiliency and his public health advocacy as my brother-in-law suffered from AIDS and died. So I am proud to introduce my brother, who has lived and suffered in a world that attempted to teach him that he was a degenerate, who has proven over and over again what should have been totally and absolutely unnecessary, that he is respected, that he is worthy, and he is a beloved child of God. Dave. Bring it in. You take that.
You're probably wondering why I'm wearing a sweater. Well, your air conditioning in this building works extremely well. And for a child from Hawaii, I really needed a sweater to get going. So your minister was talking about stories and how we see them in the Bible. And as the world goes on, stories continue to grow every single day. And so I have some stories to relay to you. I'm going to be looking at my notes because normally I would like to memorize everything, but I haven't had enough time to do all of that, so I'll be back and forth here a little bit. So I want to first of all thank Sheila. That was very sweet of you. And I want to welcome everyone that's out there in the streaming world and thank everyone in the church that's here. And normally in Hawaii, we open with saying aloha. Many of you have heard that word. The word means hello. It also means goodbye, and it also means love. So in the context of your conversation with anyone when you're talking in Hawaii, that word has those three meanings. And we always, so today I would say hello, and soon I'll say goodbye, and I'll extend my thanks and love to you all for being a part of my little gathering here today. This is the first time that I've been asked by anyone to discuss the first 75 years of my life in 30 minutes or less, to be followed by questions. So it's kind of a unique experience for me. And you might be thinking, well, okay, so you're a doctor, a family doctor. So why are you talking about this 45 years old pandemic of AIDS and this 25 years old battle of same-gender marriage? In Hawaii now, where I live, and in America, which I still live in, I unexpectedly witnessed and participated in both issues from the very beginning all the while practicing full-time family medicine. And you might also ask at this point, how did this Protestant kid from nowhere end up being at the beginning of anything in the middle of the Pacific Ocean and being inspired by a book maybe and a Catholic priest and a Buddhist attorney? They all flow together. But before I give you the details, let me tell you a few mostly 1980 and 1990 short stories that I've told no one else before today. And with doing that, I want to start first with giving a few quick personal details that might help you a little bit. Most importantly, I was lucky. My Canadian parents, who immigrated to America, to Rochester, New York, from Toronto when I was 13 months old, were not homophobic. They loved everyone. My 4 younger sisters did too. I did not know my parents were not homophobic. I didn't even know what the word was. At the age of 8, I decided to become a doctor, and I was quite committed to doing that. And I had ruled out being an architect or an opera singer, which were on the list as well, seriously, believe it or not. Then at the age of 13, a seed was unexpectedly planted in my brain when I read James Michener's imperfect book, Hawaii. Through the entire book, though the entire book was fiction with a few historical facts, many of the individual missionaries and royalty portrayed were actually real people in history. I read of this also incredibly beautiful place and the people, and it was reinforced after my Rochester great-aunt made annual visits to Hawaii and sent me postcards and told tales upon a return. But most importantly, as I read this book, I met this person, which I didn't know at the time would become my future spiritual mentor. You may or may not have heard of him before. His name is Father Damien. He's a Catholic priest from Belgium who came to Hawaii, and his ministry with people with leprosy was from 1873 to 1889 when he died from leprosy. Damien taught me, as a 13-year-old know-nothing kid, about loving and caring unconditionally for the ill, the abandoned, the oppressed and the hated, and how to work with politicians in the medical community and to see what humanitarian leadership was and was not, and about how to be a social activist. And he also taught me to never depend on leadership for leadership. But while reading this book, I also knew at the age of 13 that if you really knew me, you would hate me. I heard it over and over again in my head, and I did not understand why it was going on, and I was just like, but I knew I was different, whatever that meant. And my adolescent brain also reasoned that, therefore, since hate is such a big thing in my brain, if I became a doctor, you would be more likely to like me. That was kind of incidental, because I really was going to become a doctor no matter what, but at least people might like me. I also knew this hate message did not come to me from my family. I had never heard the words gay or homosexual, nor met anyone who was gay. I knew nothing about sex except from my biology classes and those animals that we dissect and all that. But somehow the hate message had arrived successfully from society. Skipping ahead a bit, at age 22, first year medical school in 1968, University of Manitoba, Canada, I had figured out by then that I might be gay. I knew it was a big topic for me, and it might upset the apple cart of learning at medical school. So I decided, no time for this topic. Ignore it totally, period. But then, in my second year, June 28th, 69, the Stonewall Riots occurred in New York City. I saw it in the news and really wanted to know what it was all about. There was no digital media then, of course. The LGBT newspapers and magazines from the US were often confiscated at the border by the Canadian Post Office, so we almost never got any information about that. Going ahead a little more, after medical school in '72, I had promised myself if I survived internship at Toronto General Hospital in the hospital for sick kids in 1973 that I would travel around the world so I could grow up, come out, meet the well people and the remarkable human race, as almost everyone I met at school was ill. I began my '73-'74 world trip by heading west to Winnipeg and Vancouver and to a place called Quadra Island, where there was a gay couple. I had never conceived of that, and I thought it was really neat. Then next I dropped down to San Francisco. I'd heard there were gay people there. I was shocked at the size of the LGBT community, and it was actually scary. So I moved on, and then I went to LA with a straight physician friend who had lots of gay friends, and I thought that was kind of nifty. Oh, but the traffic in the air, no, 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 no. Then next was Hawaii, was on my list. When I arrived there, it was very hard to believe how beautiful it was. And on my second day there, I knew nobody. I was walking on the ocean, on the beach, at the base of Diamond Head Crater. You've all seen it in pictures. And I met two fellows on a towel nearby. One was the executive director of Hawaii Public Television, who invited me that evening to the world premiere of his newest documentary entitled Damien. I was shocked. That was a moment for me, like, this Damien in my childhood is now, I'm in his homeland, and this is happening. It was a 2-hour soliloquy. It was a masterpiece. It's still available at some of the sites online, and it's entitled simply Damien. And so I went to the event, and much to my shock, I met the actual star by the name of Terrence Knapp. I by then knew the the director-producer, and I met the composers and the musicians and the performers. And then the tagline was, "They're all gay." The documentary went on, of course, to win many national awards and was used by the Vatican to educate Pope Benedict about Damien on his road to sainthood. My thought at the moment was, this documentary might be a sign to me. This might be my destiny. Then I decided it was. I would cancel my world trip and stay in Hawaii and practice medicine for sure, now. Then, no, you can't do that yet. You got to go back and finish my trip because I'm here to learn about the world, which I knew nothing about. So I continued to study leprosy in Malaysia, Thailand, Burma, Calcutta, Nepal, and I went back and finished my family practice residency in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and then it was done. July 1st, 77, I moved to Hawaii. Jump ahead a little bit, 1980, a few years later, when I came out at the age of 34 in Honolulu at my family reunion there, my parents informed me that they had suspected that I was gay when I was 5 years old. I was stunned. How is this possible? How did they know, or why did they think this? And their reply was really, to me, in reflection, is really very amusing. They said I was such a good kid. I was never in fights. I protected my sisters. I produced musicals for the neighborhood in our basement. And I showed no interest in sports. I'm going, is that how you qualify to be gay? I'm not sure it's true, but that was their perception at the time. You know, it was basically 1950, and that's what they perceived. But also, on the same day, they informed me they had been holding LGBT support groups at our home through our John Calvin Presbyterian Church while I was at the university in Canada. Oh my goodness. I didn't know. They're doing support groups for LGBT people, and I didn't even know. I knew that they didn't know at the time that I was gay. Like, whoa, who are these parents of mine? They're pretty cool. Thus, I thought, moving forward a little more, I was prepared, but I didn't know it. I was gay. I was out. I was in a beautiful place, Hawaii. I was a family doctor who knew the history of Damien, who had guided me here. And I was a beginning activist who had witnessed and understood homophobia a little by then. The book seemed to foretell or be my guide to my destiny, and I was kind of shocked by it. As time will tell, going forward in that book, all those missionary and royalty type people that you read about that really did exist in history, all of their descendants ended up someday in my family practice. Kind of blows my mind. So moving forward, we're back now around 1979, 80. I started seeing in my family practice gay men with significant lymphadenopathy, swollen glands in the neck, their armpit, their groin. And I subsequently diagnosed Hawaii's first AIDS patient with pneumocystis pneumonia in 1981. My AIDS ministry had begun 100 years after Father Damien. Many patients and friends told me I was walking in Damien's path. I made it very clear I had no intention of dying. I actually decided privately that I must be celibate for the next 10 years until we could figure this disease out. Priests do it, Damien did it, so can I. Wait, I have more to tell you. While running a full medical practice in this 1982 time, I co-founded with 3 friends the Life Foundation, which is our AIDS foundation in Hawaii, and was chair for the first 8 years. Our board and volunteers did amazing, amazing, amazing things, many first things in America, first in America in Hawaii. Based on if you were alive at that time, which most of you were, and if you happen to know people in the LGBT community, one of our phrases is knowledge is power, action equals life, and silence equals death. That ACT UP and many of the other AIDS organizations used all the time as time went forward. Our organization, the Life Foundation, was the first AIDS service organization in the nation to encourage people who were at risk for HIV, no matter their risk factor, to do the antibody tests when there were no legal protections and there was no treatments. But we believed knowledge is power, action equals life, silence equals death. We were the first organization in the country to put an AIDS prevention program together for high schools. The high school at that time was a private school called Punahou, which happens to be the school that our former President Obama was raised in. Punahou in Hawaii, you probably don't know the name. It's an incredible, incredible school. But then the Department of Health came to us and asked our organization if they could steal our curriculum for the schools. And we said, sure, of course. So they started putting our curriculum in all the public schools. And it was extremely successful. And I'm talking here now about 1985, when America was not doing very good with AIDS at all. But we were doing quite well. Shortly after 85, we were working on it, and we finally managed to create a needle exchange program, which is still controversial in many places in America. And we created this program for people that are using drugs. And I'll just give you a current statistic. If you go back to 1980 and all the women that are using IV drugs that might have become infected, and how many of them have transferred that disease to their children, we're still at 0. So needle exchange programs work. If you happen to be not doing one in your town here, get it going, because it totally works. And we did, through our Life Foundation, get it through the legislature, both the House and the Senate, in the 80s. We now distribute about 1 million syringes and needles every year. But many other leadership programs across the country, and it was quite fascinating. The CDC, Dr. Curran and all of his other people who were quite wonderful, were stunned by what we were doing. They say, how in the heck do you get this done here? And they said, we don't understand it, but we're going to help you. And so the CDC made sure that we stayed alive. But at the Department of Health, which is very keen in every state and very important, we had a fellow, Dr. John Lewin, who was very, very supportive. He was a good friend of mine, and so it was kind of like friends working with friends. Department of Health, the AIDS organizations, the activists. We had a really solid community working. Everybody was working. The AIDS care and advocacy battles with the various religions, the legislative bodies, the businesses, the lawyers, and the hospitals were exhausting, and participation in many hospital, state, and city and private foundation committees was exhausting. I could continue on with, this is like 45 years of work now, I could continue on and on and on with all the things the Life Foundation has done. But I will kind of stop it there. But personally, when I reached a cumulative of 1,000 patients in my practice around 1989, I was exhausted and said, I'm going to stop keeping my list. I've got to let the system in Hawaii work. But behind the scenes, just an example, we prevented the state legislature from passing a law to send all of the AIDS patients to Kalaupapa, where Father Damien had all of the leprosy patients. That was actually a thing that was being put through the legislature. It shows you how backward many people can be. And we passed many laws to prevent discrimination, expand healthcare coverage, medication access, a very unique program to monitor the immune system of all the people in Hawaii that had HIV without compromising their privacy. And we expanded wellness programs and housing programs for people that were homeless or just too ill to take care of a place for themselves to live. So another thing that happened personally, during these early days of AIDS in 1982, I fell in love with a fellow by the name Tom Clark, who had just completed his Air Force tour of duty. I even imagined at that time, about the time of maybe getting married. But of course, I said to myself, who are you kidding? This is 1982. His career took him to Michigan and Texas, and we remained close via phone, mail, and visits. Then in 1989, 100 years, almost to the day, after Damien's death, Tom was dying of AIDS. Hanging up from our last phone call and crying, I begged to God that during this great coming out of gay people across America with AIDS, but even the non-AIDS community was coming out as well. I begged for marriage and for civil rights to God. I wanted 1,000, at least in Hawaii, 1,000 civil rights to promote wellness, stable relationships, and a better destiny for the next generation, and hopefully eventually a cure for AIDS. And then I said to myself again, who are you kidding? Then, believe it or not, a few weeks later in Hawaii, beginning of 1990, a local LGBT activist who I knew very well by the name of Bill Woods took 3 LGBT couples to the Department of Health for marriage license certificate. My Department of Health director friend, Dr. John Lewin, his staff denied the license. I talked to John, how could you do this, John? And he says, well, this is about laws. It's not about anything else. And we had a healthy argument. He's still a friend. But within a week, the couples ended up with a fellow by the name of Dan Foley. He's a brilliant, non-LGBT, i.e. straight, married man with 2 kids, Buddhist, philosopher, private attorney. He undertook the case, which eventually was initially labeled Bear versus Lewin, Bear being one of the 6 people, and Lewin was Dr. Lewin. The name changes over the decades, depending upon the phase of legal battles that we're in. And a year or 2 later, Evan Wolfson from the East Coast, with the Freedom to Marry, joined and became as co-counsel, and together they coordinated events in Vermont, Massachusetts, New York, California, and all over the place. They were quiet advocates with amazingly brilliant ideas. This book right here that is entitled The Engagement, and it's America's Quarter-Century Struggle Over Same-Sex Marriage by the author, who is incredible, and Sasha Eisenberg. And you can get it at any of the usual places where you buy books these days in America. Tells the story of about the first third of the book is about what's going on in Hawaii, and 2/3 is about the rest of America. And it tells the story of the battles on and off, on and off, on and off, through every place you can imagine. And I'm a little prejudiced, it's a fascinating, fascinating, fascinating story if you really want to understand what was going on. I jumped on the board very easy behind the scene because I was practicing medicine and I didn't want my face in the media too much on this topic because it was so controversial. But I worked with Dan at the beginning raising money and helping to organize the LGBT community and the religious communities and political communities that were supportive of the concept. In my spare time, I served on the boards of Marriage Project Hawaii, Hawaii Equal Rights Marriage Project, Civil Union Civil Rights, Protect Our Constitution, Equality Hawaii, and others. As we morph through the many phases of the battles with homophobia and the religions and the politicians and the hidden money of the Mormon and the Catholic Church and the conservative Protestant churches, and during our battles with constitutional amendments. There's heroes and hypocrisy everywhere in this book. I'll give you one example or more. In the 1980s, the Honolulu Catholic Bishop Ferrario, called me to a meeting with him in his penthouse tower next to Father Damien's Cathedral in Father Damien Square. Damien keeps reoccurring in my life, and I'm grateful. The bishop said he had no objections to me and the Life Foundation promoting condoms and all the other things we were doing. But could I please keep the print and TV media away from him? He had to stick with the Vatican's positions, and the media was making him look bad, like I control the media. So here I am sitting with this closeted Bay bishop, and I knew it, and he didn't know I knew it, who had abused many young men, including my patient, one of my patients who now had AIDS. I say parenthetically, the bishop was subsequently prosecuted, though conveniently the system politely waited till the bishop was dead. Back to the bishop, when after our discussion was completed, he turned to me and he says, "Where are you going next?" I thought, are you cruising me? By then I knew what cruising was all about, and I now knew he was a gay man. He was acting just like someone that was cruising me. But I trumped him. Pardon the word, I shouldn't use that one. I explained I would be doing home visits with several of my AIDS priest patients, priests with AIDS, who are living downstairs in the residential Damien Priest Tower. I have repeated for decades that the Catholic Church is the largest gay organization in the world, except perhaps the U.S. military. There's a book printed in 1996 by a former priest, Ronald Cousins, The Changing Face of the Priesthood. It's filled with hypocrisy galore. And his suggestions, and I've told lots more Catholic Church and priest stories I could tell, but I'll spare you right now. But he says at least 50% of the priests in the Catholic Church are gay, and I totally agree. So, getting a little back to the story, in 1996, the politicians had begun to write a constitutional amendment to outlaw same-gender marriage. We knew that it would be very powerful and it might pass, and eventually it did pass. But I remember clearly the day that our attorney, Dan Foley, returned to his office after a private meeting with two unnamed senators explaining why they themselves actually just wrote the constitutional amendment to outlaw same-gender marriage. I was shocked, and that it was going to be placed on the ballot. But they explained to me it was written with a self-destruction clause that most people don't understand. The document reserved to the legislature, not the courts, the power to approve or stop the creation of same-gender marriage. And every politician was very, 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 very confident that the legislature would not ever approve such a law. Fortunately, our brilliant Buddhist attorney was confident that with quality, persistent educational programs and time, we could still win. And of course, 17 years later, Dan was proven to be correct. In 2013, our legislative House and Senate passed a same-gender marriage law. Patience is really important. The war against ignorance and bigotry is always winnable. It just takes time. Also in 1996, while this was going on with the constitutional amendment, my Canadian cousin, Heather Forrester Smith, she was a government attorney in Toronto, Ontario at the time. David Smith, her husband, was a private practice attorney who was just recently elected to the provincial government. They came to visit me in Hawaii, and they knew I was involved in the Hawaii same-gender marriage case. And we were walking along at Kapiolani Park at the base of the iconic Diamond Head crater, and they said to me that they had been tasked to try to get the same 1,000 civil rights in Ontario, but they were not sure if they could get the M word. I asked Dan Foley for copies of his documents that were the foundation of his case, and which he was happy to share. And I gave it to them, and then for 7 years, there was no feedback. Then in 2013, David called me from Ottawa. He was now working in Prime Minister Chrétien's office in the Department of Defense, requesting my current address. I laughed because I knew these documents were just Xeroxes that I'd give him. He explained that he could not divulge any details, but suggested I keep an eye out for Ontario and Canadian news. Okay, I was smiling and hopeful, but I had no idea what was going on. Unknown to me, because I've been very busy for quite some time, my cousin had become the Chief Justice of the Ontario Supreme Court in 2002, and they had been working on it for a long time. And on June 10th, 2013, my cousin announced the court decision making same-gender marriage legal in Ontario. And Canada had achieved success with the civil rights and the marriage word. A few months later, the nation of Canada then passed same-gender marriage for their entire country. For those that are interested, last month, July 24th edition of the Toronto Globe and Mail, the author of this book, Sasha, wrote an article about how Canada helped America with same-gender marriage and how Canada helped America become more humanitarian. So it's available online. You just, Toronto Globe and Mail. I don't have a subscription to it. I don't think you need a subscription to it, but it's a fascinating article. But you heard it here first. Hawaii led Canada, who led America into same-gender marriage. Many religions and political parties have threatened the world by stating there's a destructive gay agenda, usually claiming it will harm your children, your family, and our nation. And I say, yes, Dorothy, there is a gay agenda. It is to save lives and support love. And as Harvey Milk said in 1978, before he was assassinated for whom he was a gay man, you've got to give them, i.e. people, you've got to give people hope. And as theologian, William Coffin says, and I love this one, love and justice are mates. So that's basically some private stories. It's not in the book. And I'm kind of astonished that all that's happened, but it was that little book, Hawaii, that I accidentally read when I was 13, and I met this guy, Damien, who's been present at every level in my life, has guided me in medicine, has guided me in the same-gender battle. He's guided me in how to fight hypocrisy, government, religions. As I said earlier, the war against ignorance and bigotry is always winnable. Homophobia is always, my note here I just added today. Oh, homophobia is always a losing battle, especially in religion and political spheres. And homophobia becomes a part of your PR marketing program and strategy. And the yelling people in the various religious faiths are my partners in ending homophobia. And so I thank them too. I could give you tons of names, which will mean nothing to you in Hawaii, that the homophobes helped immensely. And most of them were religion, but there are a few politicians as well. And I'm very much grateful for where we're at. And I believe my religion has quietly helped me, because I don't talk religion and try to promote my religion to anyone. It's just something that I live, and I just believe I'm walking in the paths of Damien and perhaps even Christ. So that's all I have today. It's not a long presentation. Those are all private stories. No one else knows them, or as far as I know, except maybe my sister and her husband. Any questions from the audience about this 75 years program that I've been on? And Linda, the minister, is stepping forward to help
I'm coming
us
around
guide.
with a microphone so that folks who are streaming, and there are some, can hear you. Was that you, Joan?
Said, when is he going to print it? Your talk. Your talk was wonderful.
Actually, my sister said the same thing. I have no idea. I've never thought about doing anything about that. But weirdly, and I don't have any idea how this will play out, just before this is my annual family reunion that, despite COVID, we were able to pull it off up in the Adirondacks. And just before I left, about a week before I left, the National Public Radio has this talking program where they record people's stories. StoryCorps, okay. And one of the representatives in Hawaii said that they wanted to do my story, and I was kind of like, okay, I don't know how to do this. And they said, oh, we'll figure it out. And so I'm told that I have 3 2-hour interviews coming up, and I don't know where and how it's going to go and what it's going to be, whether it'll be useful or anything. It'll be interesting, I guess, but I don't. So that's one thing that's happening. Then the other thing that happened just almost at the same time, unrelated, this one gay fellow in town who's at the University of Hawaii has asked if he could write a book about me, and I went, what? I don't know how to do any of this kind of stuff. So it's got me a little apprehensive, and I don't know how to put it together. So I said, well, if someone knows how to do this, I'm open to the idea. I don't know if anything can become of it. So I have no idea where that will go. The only other thing that I do have that does exist is we have the, 3 years ago, I took all my tons of documents on AIDS and same-genders marriage, and the University of Hawaii has a called the Hamilton Library, and we started an archive of all my stuff there. And so the printed material is all there. Someday it'll get digitalized, maybe if we are able to raise any money to digitalize it. And I don't know if we'll succeed, but at least I'm happy to know that all of my original documents and stories are sitting in an archive, which will be, as soon as COVID is, as we say, POW, which means over, as soon as COVID's POW, we'll be able to open the archives and start having people come back in. So something's going to happen, but I don't know yet exactly what.
Anyone else? Good. Whoop.
Thank you so much, first of all. I should know the answer to this question, but I don't. Could you fill us in on where we are today as a society in terms of treating HIV, AIDS? Is it a curable disease now with medical treatment? Where are we?
At the beginning, it was horrible and it was a death sentence. The medications that have been invented and researched and brought into clinical practice are extremely impressive. They were fairly toxic at the beginning, but they still were helpful. And we've gotten more and more and more into more amazing drugs that have much, much less in the way of side effects. We've started combining them into 1 or 2 pills a day instead of like 24 pills a day. And sometimes even just 1 pill a day, and almost free of side effects. And we're in the process now of converting over to giving people medications that think they're at risk. It's called PrEP, where you can take a pill and just take 1 pill a day. And you got about a 99% chance of not catching it if you engage in risky behavior during sexual activity. So it actually prevents the spread of AIDS. But for people that are actually infected, some of the new medicines, it's just 1 pill a day and minimal side effects, and can suppress almost 100% the virus. And if you are not expressing the virus, you don't transmit the virus. And so that cuts down dramatically the spread of the disease. And then finally, we're actively in the process right now of developing injectable medication, which is a combination of two or 3, or maybe even a 4th drug in time, where they all together in an injectable form. And that'll be particularly useful for people that might be non-compliant because their life is hard and they just can't remember their meds and stuff. Right now, the ones exist are basically, there's a once a day and a twice a day shot, but we're looking at once a week, once a month, and some people are fantasizing about once a year and getting little capsules inserted, and they'll be released throughout the year. That's still much in the research area. But one of the things that I've said to new people that are infected, and many of the early AIDS patients that I had who are still alive, they're long haulers as we call them, and they're doing well. And in the early days, I used to joke and say, and this is when it was really bad and we didn't have stuff, I'd make a joke, I wanted to bring some sort of hope, and I said, one of the ways one of the things that'll make you happy is buy some real estate, and then you've got a mortgage and you're, damn it, I'm gonna stay alive to get this mortgage paid off. I have several patients who have said to me, thank you for telling me to get a mortgage because I'm still alive, and it played a role in helping me get there. But one of the things that I do say to people right now, and it's just in the last few years, that if you absolutely comply with your medications and make changes necessary based on lab tests, if you absolutely comply with your medications and do your monitoring with your doctor, which now is often just like maybe twice a year, maybe 3 times a year, and you're doing well, you have your chances of 100% survival leading out a normal lifespan is profoundly good. So basically, you can have a normal lifespan if you cooperate with the medical profession. So it's incredibly wonderful where we're at. And I think there's more wonders to come. I think a vaccine for this virus is, because it's very different from COVID and all the other viruses we know about, is still extremely difficult. But some of the research that messenger RNA vaccine, like Moderna and the Pfizer one, if I recall correctly, is it Jane Doudna? I can never say her name properly, I'm embarrassed, but she was the one that developed the research genetics to manipulate viruses. She was born in Hilo, Hawaii, and grew up in Hawaii, so as we say in Hawaii, she's a local girl that did good. And all of the research that you're seeing on these vaccines, it's all from the research that she did over a couple of decades, both in Stanford and Berkeley and France. But all of her graduate students came together at the beginning of the COVID epidemic. Walter Isaacson's new book about her will actually describe the scenes where she called in January of 2020, or maybe it was in the December of 2019, she called all of her graduate students together who are all into big companies, and she brought them all to her place. She said, we have to be involved in this. We're all smart. We're all making a lot of money. I'm asking you to all to share all your information, to do nothing proprietary, and for the sake of the globe, we're going to do this. And they were the ones that created the technology to develop from the messenger RNA. And so that's just another local lady that did good. But they're now using the technology, maybe using messenger RNA to deliver genetic information to infected HIV cells, and may be able to cause them to malfunction in a way that doesn't kill them, but also doesn't assist in the reproduction of the HIV virus. It's pie in the sky stuff, and I think it's scientifically, it's totally feasible. I don't know when it's going to become real. But there's lots of exciting stuff going on in HIV, thank God.
Jamie, are you? All right. I coordinated with the question globally. This church got very involved in around 2005 for about 10 years in Zambia because of the AIDS pandemic. Globally, are these medications and resources reaching distant places?
Welcome to politics. And well, sadly, it's all about politics and medicine. And there's some wonderful politicians, and there's lots of religious organizations that are absolutely wonderful, and they're all contributing and helping. And many pocket areas in different countries are being helped, and sometimes different nations are being helped. It's never enough. But there's definitely help is going on, and don't stop helping. I appreciate the fact that you're doing that.
Would it still be fair to use the word pandemic?
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely. Okay. We did, by the way.
And what's interesting, again, this is just a little private story. As I mentioned in the story, I had Hawaii's first AIDS case. With COVID in Hawaii, the day they announced the first AIDS case in Hawaii, they said it was a 34-year-old man working in Waikiki. And I went, whoop, sounds like a gay man to me. All the owners of all the gay bars were my patients. I called them on the phone, and I said, a couple of them, and I said, is this your patient? And they said, yeah. And I said, how can I help you? And so I got involved with the first COVID case because it turned out the Department of Health at that time wasn't doing testing of family members because they didn't have enough stuff. All they were doing is suggesting to the family members that they isolate themselves, and which is totally reasonable, but why not test them, which they didn't do. And so I arranged for a private contractor with a private lab to go over to the family and test them so they knew the mother was positive. She ended up in hospital. Fortunately, she did not get too ill, but she was there for several days. The young fellow, this is a 34-year-old guy that was the first case, he was in hospital for several months. And he's still recovering and making progress, which is wonderful to see. But kind of like, go around, come around. I kind of like, wow. First COVID. Any more questions?
We did have a comment online. We had one of our streamers wanted to thank you for your humanitarian work. You know, I think we all feel the same, that we are grateful that there are people like you called, that it's your destiny to be in the right place at the right time with a heart for justice and compassion, and for that we are so grateful.
Thank you.
Sometimes we take for granted the hard work that goes behind the rights that we then get to enjoy. So thank you, David.
Thank you. Thank you, Father Damien.
Is there any other questions? Jamie, did you have something? Watching the hour. Anyone? Anyone? Laura, do you?
I just wanted to tell you that we benefited from your activism. We were married in 2013, and
In where?
in our house.
In your house. Okay, here. Okay.
Barefoot. No, not barefoot. But I also wanted to let you know I'm a teacher, a high school teacher, and it used to be in my classroom, I teach English. I'm going to take this out. It used to be when if I gave any background about a person was gay, they would be like, ew, you know, and this is in the late 90s, early 2000s. Now they are, you know, like very active and, you know, stand up for anybody who's gay, and how dare you judge? And so it's really changed a lot since I've been
It's
teaching.
quite fascinating to watch this evolution over the last
So
several
fast.
years. And it's for me, when I was praying to God that we can create a better day for the next generation, so that they someday will actually say, what's AIDS? And when someone says that to me, I know we've won. And likewise, I was praying for the day that young kids will say, what's the big deal? We could always get married. And it's actually almost happened in Hawaii with some youth groups that I was involved in, because, you know, in Hawaii became legal in 2013. Well, those kids aren't that old, but they're not that young, and they talk about it sometimes like, what are you talking about? I didn't know you couldn't get married. And so that was my long-term I had a hidden agenda. I wanted to make the future normal for the kids and not be able to understand what it's about at all. And I'd like to do the same thing with homophobia. Although I must remember it's my PR marketing technique with them, so they will continue to help me until we reign in that message of hate.
Well, it's coming along, I can tell you from my standpoint.
Anyone else? I think we're good to go.
Okay.
You never know what big stories are going to, you know, come through that door. And for your willingness to tell your story, and for the way that story inspires, and for the way it's made the world better for all of us, we are very grateful. So thank you so much. I hope we see you again.
And as we say in Hawaii, aloha.